You ever wake up to $1,000 electric bill and think, did I accidentally start a cryptocurrency farm in my sleep? That was me last month, standing in my kitchen in fuzzy slippers, staring at a bill so absurdly high it could have powered a small village, or, as it turns out, one entitled HOA president's luxury golf cart. I didn't know it yet, but my peaceful little retirement dream home was about to become ground zero for the pettiest, most electrically charged war in suburban history. And at the center of it all? Karen. Yes, that kind of Karen. The kind that thinks HOA stands for her own authority. What started as a bizarre power drain turned into the perfect opportunity for revenge, with a timer, 3 seconds of electricity, and a whole lot of neighborly chaos. When I first bought this house, it felt like the perfect step into a quieter life. After 25 years as an electrical engineer for defense systems, I was ready to kick back with a hammock, a good scotch, and maybe the occasional woodworking project in the shed. The neighborhood looked peaceful, a charming cul-de-sac where all the lawns matched and the mailboxes stood in perfectly measured symmetry. It should have been paradise. But paradise, I learned quickly, comes with a price, and in this case, that price was Karen. She introduced herself on day one with a pamphlet on lawn height standards and a clipboard full of HOA policies. I smiled, nodded, and assumed she'd fade into the background like most overzealous HOA type. Big mistake. Within a week, I'd gotten 3 notices. One for leaving my trash cans out 35 minutes past pickup, another for using the wrong shade of white on my garage trim, and a third for excessive humming while mowing my lawn. That last one wasn't even a rule. Karen just didn't like my rendition of classic rock while landscaping. Still, I tried to play nice. It wasn't until month 2 that things got truly strange. My electric bill suddenly doubled. I figured it was a billing error. After all, I wasn't running a pool heater or a tanning salon. I had smart thermostats, LED bulbs, and solar panels. This wasn't just unusual, it was impossible. I called the electric company and spoke to a guy named Tyler, who sounded half asleep until he saw my usage report. "Sir," he said, "unless you've got a secret space heater the size of a hot tub, something's not right." Curiosity turned into suspicion. As an engineer, I trust numbers more than I trust most people, and the numbers didn't lie. Every night, between 2 a.m. and 4 a.m., there was a strange spike in usage coming directly from my shed. I hadn't been in there for a week. Nothing was plugged in besides a workbench light and an old mini-fridge that hadn't held anything but root beer since last summer. I chalked it up to faulty wiring, maybe a short in the panel. But something didn't sit right. So, I set up a camera. Now, I should mention I don't do things halfway. This wasn't a ring cam duct taped to a rake. I installed a motion-triggered HD security camera, rigged to my home server with real-time alert. That night, I waited. The alert came at 2:13 a.m. I pulled up the feed and stared at my tablet, slack-jawed. There, in full suburban glory, was Karen, bathrobe, slippers, and all, waddling into my backyard like she owned the place. She walked straight into my shed, flicked on the light, and rolled out an extension cord. Then she plugged in her gleaming white golf cart with gold trim and a license plate that read KWEN1. She even whistled while she did it. I watched in stunned silence as she muttered to herself, "Free power is the best power," and waddled back home like this was a normal Tuesday night routine. I couldn't believe it. The president of the HOA was stealing my electricity. Not borrowing. Not asking. Just outright plugging in her overpriced neighborhood chariot like I was the community charging station. The next morning, I confronted her. I walked up to her pristine lawn, where she was brushing leaves off her driveway with a hand broom. "Hey Karen," I said calmly, "fun night last night?" She looked up, squinting. "I beg your pardon?" Funny thing. My shed light turned on around 2. And somehow, my security footage caught a mysterious figure with your haircut plugging a golf cart into my outlet. Her face went pale for a moment, then twisted into something between confusion and indignation. "That's not your outlet," she snapped. "It's behind the property line. It's common area. It's in my shed. Still, we have shared access, per HOA regulations. I designed the HOA map overlay, Karen. There's no shared anything. That shed is 22 feet into my lot." "Well, you shouldn't be so stingy with your electricity. It's just a golf cart." I just stared at her, baffled. She genuinely believed I was being unreasonable. I could have lost it right there, but I held back. I knew where this was going. Karen didn't just want to be right, she needed to dominate. And I wasn't about to let her plug her little kingdom into my wall. An hour later, I received an email from the HOA board. Subject: Complaint of harassment. According to Karen, I had aggressively approached her with accusations and veiled threats, and she was deeply concerned for her safety. I was formally warned not to engage with her again without HOA supervision. The audacity would have been laughable if it wasn't so incredibly on brand. That night I didn't sleep. Not because I was angry, though I was, but because I was building something. Something beautiful. Something righteous. I'd had enough of Karen's smug theft and the HOA's nonsense. And if she wanted electricity so badly, well, she could have it. For exactly 3 seconds at a time. The next morning, I woke up with one goal in mind: figure out how deep Karen's influence actually ran in this HOA circus. I wasn't just dealing with an annoying neighbor anymore. This was someone who believed she could redefine property lines with sheer arrogance and rewrite the rules on the fly to suit her need. Her little stunt with the complaint had me flagged by the board without even a chance to explain myself. It was becoming very clear that Karen wasn't just a member of the HOA, she was the HOA. And if I wanted to stop her, I had to understand the structure I was up against. I started by attending the next HOA meeting, something I had actively avoided since moving in. The meeting was held in the community clubhouse, which looked more like a wedding venue than a neighborhood hub. Crystal chandeliers, fake ficus plants, and a snack table with the blandest cookies imaginable. Karen sat front and center, flanked by 2 other board members who looked like they'd been carved from the same smug block of granite. One of them, a guy named Ron, wore a blazer with elbow patches and talked like he'd just come from debating local ordinances with the Supreme Court. The other, Linda, had a permanent scowl etched into her face, like someone just told her the world ran out of butterscotch. When I raised my hand to speak about the electricity theft, Karen interrupted me before I could get 5 words out. She waved her hand like a dismissive queen swatting a fly and said, "We will not tolerate baseless accusations during board discussions. If you have a concern, please submit it in writing." She smiled that tight-lipped smile that said she thought she'd just scored a point. I wanted to laugh. Instead, I nodded, sat down, and quietly planned her downfall. Over the next week, I did some digging. I learned that Karen had been the HOA president for 7 straight years, and in that time, there had never been a contested election. Not once. Every year, the ballot listed her name and no others. I reached out to a few neighbors, asking if they'd ever considered running. Most laughed nervously. One told me she tried once, and suddenly her mailbox was labeled non-compliant and had to be replaced at her expense. Another said he filed a complaint about Karen years ago, and within a month got cited for suspicious yard items, which turned out to be his daughter's flamingo lawn decorations. It didn't take long to realize the HOA rules were Karen's personal weapon. There was a clause allowing temporary entry to peripheral structures for maintenance observation, which she used to justify snooping around sheds, backyards, and even people's garages if the doors were open. The best part? That rule had been added the same year she bought her golf cart. The worst part was the official complaint she lodged against me had now turned into a daily fine for improper storage of private electrical fixtures, as if having an outlet in my own shed was some kind of code violation. I was now being charged $25 a day for not removing a power outlet on my own property. My lawyer friend laughed when I told him. He said, You've got yourself a rogue HOA dictatorship, buddy. You need to go full petty. That's when I decided I wasn't just going to stop Karen. I was going to humiliate her. Quietly, elegantly, electrically. I started working on the solution in my garage that night. I still had all my tools from my engineering days, and most of them had barely seen use since I left the job. I brought out a Raspberry Pi board, a custom-built relay switch, a surge protector, and a timer module. I rigged it all up into a clean, weatherproof casing that would sit between the outlet and the golf cart plug. From the outside, it looked like a simple power strip, but in reality, it was a beautifully programmed revenge machine. The timer was set to allow exactly 3 seconds of power before shutting off. After that, it would reset itself after 2 hours, preventing any kind of reattempt. I even added a delay buffer so that if she tried to unplug and replug, it would lock her out entirely for the night. The best part? It wouldn't damage her cart. It wouldn't set off any alarms. It would just feed her a perfect illusion of power, just enough to turn on the charging light, before cutting her off cold. Installing it was easy. Karen, in all her arrogant glory, didn't even bother locking the shed after her nightly theft trips. I slipped the device in during the early evening hours, right before sunset, and sat back with a lawn chair and a soda, waiting for the show. Around 2:15 a.m., I got the alert. Motion detected. I tapped my tablet and watched as Karen slinked into my yard in her fuzzy robe and slippers, glancing around like a raccoon with a law degree. She opened the shed, rolled out her cable, and plugged in with the confident flair of someone who thought they were untouchable. The cart's little charging light blinked on. She smirked, gave it a pat, and waddled back home. 3 seconds later, the light shut off. And it stayed off. The next morning, I sat in my kitchen sipping coffee, watching through the window as Karen stepped outside and confidently climbed into her cart. She turned the key. Nothing. She tried again. The cart buzzed faintly, then died. She stared at it, confused. Got out. Checked the cord. Then stormed back into her house. By that afternoon, she was back with a neighborhood handyman. They both poked around the cart, the outlet, the shed. He used a voltage tester and scratched his head. I couldn't hear them, but the way she pointed at my house and flailed her arms told me I was already suspect number 1. I smiled and waved from my porch. She didn't wave back. Later that evening, I received another email from the HOA. This time, the subject line was, "Tampering with shared utility access." Karen had filed a formal accusation that I was interfering with a communal resource. They demanded I submit a statement explaining my recent electrical adjustments, or face increased fines and a potential lien on my property. That's when I knew this was more than just about a golf cart. Karen was panicking. Her perfect little setup was crumbling, and instead of taking the loss, she was doubling down. Fine. If she wanted a war over electricity, I had decades of experience and a whole garage of tools ready for battle. And I hadn't even started getting creative yet. By now, the trap had been working like a charm for 3 nights straight. Every time Karen waddled over in the dead of night and plugged in her precious chariot, she got exactly 3 seconds of juice before the current cut off. Just enough to make the charging light blink on and give her a false sense of victory. Then poof, nothing. And each morning, without fail, I'd sip my coffee and watch her face morph from confusion to barely contained rage as her dead golf cart refused to cooperate. It was becoming my favorite part of the day. But of course, Karen wasn't going to let a dead battery ruin her queenly strut. On the 4th day, she showed up with a clipboard and a guy in a polo shirt with "Licensed Electrician" embroidered on the chest. His name was Stan, and he looked like the kind of guy who had once lost a fight to a ladder. Karen marched him across my property like she was hosting a property tour, pointing at my shed, the wires, the outlet, the fence line. I stayed inside and watched from the window, resisting the urge to hold up a scorecard for dramatic flair. Stan poked around for a bit, testing voltage, checking the panel. I knew what he'd find. Nothing out of the ordinary. The current was real. The timer didn't interfere with voltage readings. The power was technically there. It just didn't last long enough to do anything useful. Eventually, I saw Karen waving her arms again, clearly unhappy with whatever Stan had told her. They stood there arguing for a good 5 minutes before she stormed off, furious. Stan looked relieved to escape. That night, just for fun, I changed the timer. Instead of cutting the power completely, I programmed it to give a single second of power every 15 minutes, just enough to make the cart groan like it was trying to wake from a coma. I imagined her pacing around her house, wondering why it was charging so slowly. I also knew she wouldn't take this lying down. I was counting on it. The next morning, I got a knock on the door. It was Karen, wearing her oversized sunglasses and fake smile like armor. She held a copy of the HOA bylaws in one hand and a printed photo in the other. The photo was a still frame from a blurry security cam pointed at her cart, showing the charging cable sagging just enough to look like it was doing something. "I have evidence," she said smugly. "You're tampering with communal access. This photo shows the line dropping voltage while connected." "Karen," I said, leaning on the doorframe, "that's not a voltmeter reading. That's a bad angle of your cable looking sad." "I've submitted this to the board," she declared. "Expect a notice of violation." Again. That afternoon, I got an official letter. Paper, stamped, delivered to my mailbox. It claimed I was under investigation for malicious interference with residential power usage, and would be fined $75 unless I granted the HOA's designated inspector access to my electrical system. I scanned the letter, then laughed out loud when I read the inspector's name, Ronald J. Haskins. None other than Elbow Patch Ron from the HOA board. At this point, I realized I needed to up the ante. Not just to protect myself, but because I was starting to genuinely enjoy the game. Karen wanted to turn this into a public spectacle. Fine. I'd give her a show worth watching. The next evening, I made a few changes. I rigged a second device, hidden deeper in the outlet housing, with a Wi-Fi module that let me control it remotely. Now I could flip the power on and off from my phone, play mind games with precision timing. But the real genius? I programmed a fake charging cycle, synced with the golf cart's LED indicators. To Karen, it would look like her cart was charging for a few hours, then mysteriously dying. And she wouldn't have the tech knowledge to know she was being played. By nightfall, she came slinking back to the shed. She didn't even glance around this time. She was too used to getting away with it. She plugged in, waited a few seconds, saw the charging light turn on, and marched home. I sat in my living room and watched the timer on my phone tick down. 10 minutes later, I hit the switch. Off went the power. The cart was dead again. The next morning, I was outside watering the lawn when she came sputtering out of her house. I had timed the last fake charge to stop midway through the night. So now her cart had just enough juice to make it 30 feet down the driveway before rolling to a pathetic stop. She cursed loudly, got out, and tried to push it. Then she stormed off, red in the face. Neighbors started to notice. One jogger even stopped to help her, only to be waved off with a very loud, "I've got it, thank you." A couple across the street pulled out their phones and whispered to each other, giggling. By the time she managed to haul the cart back home, sweat dripping and robe flapping, she looked like a furious parade balloon deflating with each step. The neighborhood started buzzing. Someone printed out a photo of her cart halfway in the street and stuck it on the community bulletin board with the caption, "Queen of Kilowatts." Another neighbor photoshopped lightning bolts onto her cart and titled it, "The Ambulance." She wasn't just annoyed now. She was humiliated. That evening, I got an email from the HOA again. This time, they were scheduling a formal inspection of my property under emergency review authority. I had 48 hours to comply or risk escalated legal action. It was clear Karen had reached her limit. She was pulling every string she had left. But what she didn't know was that I'd already prepared my counterattack. I had documented every intrusion, every wire, every tool she'd used. I had timestamps, power logs, surveillance footage, even her muttering to herself while stealing electricity. But more importantly, I had something far juicier. I knew someone who used to work in county records. A quick favor later, I had access to the original HOA charter documents, and discovered something delicious. The rule that allowed temporary access to sheds? It had been slipped into an amendment written by Karen herself 3 years ago, and it had never been officially ratified by a majority vote. Legally, it didn't exist. I grinned, leaned back in my chair, and took a sip of my iced tea. Karen had built her empire on a rule that was, by every legal standard, complete fiction. And I was about to tear her little fiefdom down, 1 volt at a time. Karen wasn't the kind of person to take public embarrassment lightly. After her golf cart sputtered out halfway down the street for the 3rd day in a row, her patience had clearly snapped. I could feel it in the air. The way she glared at my house every time she passed, the way her lips curled when she saw me walking my dog, and especially the way she suddenly stopped showing up in her precious electric chariot and started making mysterious trips to the far end of the neighborhood with a bag full of what looked like paperwork. Whatever she was planning, it wasn't going to be subtle. I didn't have to wait long to find out. At 2:30 in the morning, because of course it had to be the dead of night, my motion sensors pinged again. I tapped my tablet, expecting the usual footage of Karen sneaking in with a power cord. But this time was different. She wasn't alone. She had a flashlight, gloves, and a pair of bolt cutters. She was crouched near my exterior electrical panel, muttering to herself like she was preparing for battle. I stared at the screen, absolutely stunned. She was actually trying to cut my power. Now, here's the thing about electrical engineers. We don't just wire homes, we build systems. Systems with redundancies, alerts, and decoys. That panel she was about to mess with? Totally fake. I'd installed a dummy panel on the side of the shed months ago during some rewiring work. The real control box was locked in my basement behind a steel door. So when Karen cut the cable, sparks flew dramatically, but nothing inside my house even flickered. She jumped back, yelped, and dropped the flashlight. Then she took off running, disappearing behind her hedges like a cartoon villain retreating after a failed heist. I paused the footage, rewound it, and played it again just to make sure I wasn't hallucinating. She had genuinely just tried to sabotage my home's power in the middle of the night, and failed in the most hilariously incompetent way possible. The next morning, I printed the photos from the footage, clear as day, full color, time-stamped. I walked them straight to my lawyer friend, who owed me a favor from years ago. He took one look at the images and said, "So, she's either incredibly stupid or just thinks the law doesn't apply to her." Then he pulled out his phone and made a call. By noon, Karen received a formal cease and desist notice. By 3 o'clock, she was hit with a temporary restraining order preventing her from entering my property for any reason. And by the next morning, a copy of that restraining order was taped to her front door for the whole neighborhood to see. She ripped it down in a fury, but the damage was done. The queen of the cul-de-sac had officially been dethroned. But I wasn't done yet. The restraining order triggered a mandatory HOA review, especially since she was president of the board. Apparently, being caught on video attempting to destroy a neighbor's electrical infrastructure while wearing pink bunny slippers is considered poor leadership. Who knew? The review spiraled into a deeper investigation. That's when the real goldmine surfaced. The county clerk, the same one who helped me verify the fake HOA amendment, started digging deeper into the HOA's filings. Turns out Karen had a long history of adding her own emergency bylaws and temporary amendments, none of which had ever been reviewed or approved by the majority of homeowners. She had essentially been writing her own rulebook and enforcing it like law. And somehow, no one had ever challenged her, until now. When the auditor arrived, she was a quiet, sharp-eyed woman named Vanessa who had absolutely no patience for Karen's fake smile and accidental delays. I sat in on the meeting, invited as a concerned homeowner, and watched with deep satisfaction as Vanessa laid out years of unapproved policy changes, misappropriated funds, and dozens of bogus citations issued under Karen's signature. Karen tried to interrupt, but Vanessa shut her down with a single raised finger and the line, "You've had 7 years of uninterrupted speaking time. It's someone else's turn now." The room went silent. A few people snickered. Ron and Linda, Karen's usual lapdogs, were sweating like they'd been caught smuggling illegal garden gnomes. The best part came when Vanessa dropped the bombshell. All fines issued under unratified rules were null and void. That meant every ticket, every citation, every fee that Karen had used to keep the neighborhood under her thumb was legally worthless. The board was ordered to issue formal apologies and reimbursements where possible. And as for Karen, she was placed under suspension pending legal review and barred from any HOA decision-making until further notice. The neighborhood exploded with gossip within hours. You'd think someone had announced free wine and unlimited leaf blower use. People who hadn't made eye contact in months were suddenly exchanging high fives and homemade cookies. One family put up a sign that read, "Welcome back, Sanity." Another neighbor rolled his grill into the street and hosted an impromptu barbecue just to celebrate. Karen, meanwhile, stopped leaving her house. Her golf cart was still dead, abandoned in the driveway like a relic from a fallen empire. Her lawn began to overgrow, a poetic reversal of her infamous obsession with grass length. Someone mowed, LOL, into her front yard with a weed trimmer. It stayed that way for a week. But the final cherry on top came when the HOA board, under new temporary leadership, held an emergency election. 3 new candidates ran against Karen's usual cronies, all backed by neighbors who were sick of the tyranny. I offered to help with tech, scanning ballots, securing the count, even digitizing the bylaws for transparency. When the results came in, Karen's slate lost in a landslide. For the first time in nearly a decade, she was officially out of power. And just to add insult to injury, the board passed a new rule. Any future board members caught abusing their authority could be recalled by a simple majority vote of homeowners. It was nicknamed the Karen Clause. She hated it. I loved it. A few nights later, I was enjoying a drink on my porch when I noticed movement in my side yard. For a second, I thought Karen might be trying something again. But it wasn't her. It was one of the new board members, a kind older gentleman named Hank. He handed me a plaque that read, "For outstanding service in the battle for common sense." I laughed so hard I nearly dropped my glass. I hadn't set out to become the neighborhood hero. I just wanted to stop someone from stealing my electricity. But somewhere between timers, fake panels, and HOA takedowns, I'd helped dismantle a suburban dictatorship. Not with yelling, not with drama, but with quiet planning, relentless logic, and just the right amount of petty revenge. The war wasn't over, but the power had definitely shifted. And this time, it was staying right where it belonged. A few weeks after the election, the neighborhood felt different. Lighter. Happier. People waved when they passed by instead of pretending to be busy on their phones. Kids were playing in driveways again, and the endless tension that used to hang in the air like a low-pressure storm cloud had finally lifted. Karen's reign of clipboard terror was over, and while she hadn't officially moved out, her presence had all but vanished. No more late-night inspections, no more surprise fines, and certainly no more golf cart cruises past every house like she was patrolling a kingdom. Her golf cart, by the way, remained in her driveway, dusty and abandoned, like some fallen royal carriage. The flat tires and cobweb-covered bumper were a quiet testament to just how far she'd fallen. The new HOA board had made quick work of cleaning up her mess. They threw out dozens of illegitimate fines, revised the bylaws to require community votes for all future changes, and even opened up the board meetings with a public Q&A section. For the first time since I moved in, the HOA felt like it was working for the people who actually lived here. I was asked to assist as a technology consultant for the board, just part-time, helping them digitize records and secure community data. I didn't take a salary, Just enjoyed the satisfaction of turning a once corrupt system into something useful. Plus, I had to admit, it was kind of fun watching Ron try to figure out how to use Google Docs for the first time. I swear he thought double-clicking was a legal action. Neighbors started coming out of the woodwork with stories of what Karen had done over the years. One woman said Karen made her repaint her fence because the shade of tan was too aggressive. A retired veteran explained how Karen fined him for flying a commemorative flag because it wasn't the approved size. Someone else had been charged $75 for suspicious wind chimes, whatever that means. Hearing all of it made me realize just how much people had been tiptoeing around for years. It wasn't just about electricity anymore. This had been a slow-burning neighborhood-wide hostage situation, and nobody had dared stand up to her until now. Then came the real surprise. Apparently, during the audit, it was discovered that Karen had been skimming small amounts from HOA vendor contract. It wasn't huge money, nothing that would draw major legal charges, but it was enough to force her into repayment. The board issued a formal demand for reimbursement, and instead of fighting it, she paid quietly. That silence was telling. She wasn't just defeated, she was humiliated. She stopped attending meetings altogether, and the curtains in her windows stayed drawn day and night. Eventually, people stopped talking about her as often. Her legacy became more of a cautionary tale than a grudge. The joke around the block was that if you ever got too controlling, someone would say, "Careful now, don't go full Karen." And that was that. Life returned to normal. But just when I thought the saga had reached its peaceful conclusion, the universe threw in one last twist. It was a sunny Saturday afternoon, and the neighborhood was hosting a small community barbecue. Music, burgers, lemonade, the usual suburban fare. Everyone was having a good time, laughing, relaxing. I had just sat down with a plate of ribs when I noticed a long orange extension cord slithering across the grass like a python on a mission. I followed the cord with my eyes all the way back to the source, Karen's backyard. She was doing it again. There she was, standing in the shadows behind her fence, sneakily plugging the extension cord into one of the communal outlets near the clubhouse. This time it wasn't her golf cart, though. It was a small table set up with a curling iron, a mirror, and what looked like a travel-sized generator. She was curling her hair behind the fence, trying to prep herself for what I assumed was a public comeback. The image was absurd. Karen, queen of passive aggression, using a stolen charge to fix her curls before a cookout she wasn't even invited to. I didn't say anything. I didn't have to. The cord, you see, wasn't plugged into just any outlet. The clubhouse outlets had been rewired under my guidance, and each one now had a tamper-detecting breaker with a sensor. I watched the power trip remotely on my phone and smiled. Within seconds, the curling iron shut off. Karen stared at it, puzzled, tapped it a few times, then tried to plug it back in. Same result. No juice. Her frustration was visible even from a distance. She kicked at the ground, muttered something, and disappeared back into her yard, defeated again by the very system she once abused. But I still had one final move to make. Not out of anger, just poetic symmetry. Later that night, I walked over to the clubhouse with a small package. Inside was a custom-built gag gift I'd been saving for the right moment. It was a fake power outlet mounted on a wooden plaque, with a big red button labeled "Press for Unlimited Power." When pressed, it activated a spring-loaded glitter bomb, harmless but hilarious. I mounted it outside the shed where Karen used to steal power, under a sign that read, "Free public charging, HOA approved." I didn't expect her to take the bait so quickly, but the very next day, the camera caught her at it again. She approached the shed cautiously, plugged in a small device, looked like a phone charger, then noticed the shiny new outlet and the big red button. Curiosity got the better of her. She pressed it. The glitter went everywhere. Pink, gold, silver, enough to make a unicorn sneeze. She flailed, screamed, and ran off covered in sparkle. I almost felt bad. Almost. After that, Karen disappeared for real. A for sale sign went up in her yard the following week. Rumors swirled, of course, moving closer to family, health issues, personal disgrace, but the truth didn't matter much. What mattered was that the neighborhood had finally reclaimed its sanity, and Karen was gone. As for me, I kept my shed just the way it was, complete with the timer, the hidden switch, and a new warning label that read, "Surge Protector. Not for queenly use." Every now and then, someone would ask me what finally drove Karen out, and I'd shrug and say, 3 seconds of electricity at a time. They'd laugh, and I'd offer them a drink, and we'd toast to peace, quiet, and a little bit of well-placed revenge. In the end, I didn't win with force. I won with patience, humor, and a knowledge of wiring that Karen never saw coming. She thought she could plug into anything she wanted, but what she didn't understand was that some people know how to turn the current off, and when the time is right, how to flip the whole neighborhood back on.